All right, book brats, it's time for my full summary of the book, Iron Flame. By the way, if you're interested in my social media, my merchandise, my music, hit the link in the description. Now let's just start at the beginning and go from there. By the way, spoiler alert. So the book starts off with our beloved protagonist, who I like to call Violin because she whines and wants to fiddle with something, talking to her thought-to-be dead brother about biscuits. Then we cut to some war planning between that brother, some other people, and this love interest that she had in the first book named Zaddy Spearmint, whose magical power is tickling people with shadows. She walks into this war planning meeting, but they won't tell her all the information because she's unable to shield her mind against all the brain peekers. Violin also has two other dragons from the first book. There's a big black dragon named Tyrion. There's a tiny golden dragon I like to call Goldilocks, but plot twist, the golden dragon has now become a black dragon. And Violin actually describes her in this way, that she's so black she looks purple, and I'm thinking the whole time, then she's purple. Violin's also upset with Zaddy Spearmint because he won't give her all the information that he has about the war. And quite honestly, from everything we've seen from Violin thus far, I wouldn't have given her the information either. More bickering goes on, and then they all decide they're going to go back to Dragonwarts, which is the school from the first book. When they get there, some dude's standing up reading off a death list that includes all of their names. So they're all standing there alive, listening to their names being called off the death roll, and they're like, nah, this is awkward. Apparently this dude named Daddy Atos is the bad guy, and he tried to get all of them killed, but the mother wasn't in on it, and there's this feud. Zaddy Spearmint tattles on Atos and says, yeah, we were all attacked by Death Eaters. We don't know what's going on. Dane, the brain peeker from the last book, is excited to see Violin because he kind of has a thing for her, but she doesn't have a thing for him because he's a brain peeker and he did some other stuff, and she just tells him off. And then they have their graduation party because I guess everything's okay now and they can rejoin their class. Violin also has some friends in that school that she gets to see again that didn't get to go with her to the war because they don't know about the enemies that no one else knows about, so she lies to them because they can't handle the truth. Then Zaddy Spearmint graduates Dragonwarts and gets to go to the front lines of wherever he's going. Violin doesn't trust Zaddy Spearmint because, again, he didn't give her all the information, but then again, she's not giving her friends all the information, so she's a freaking hypocrite. And then Dane, the brain peeker, becomes the leader of Fourth Wing. Oh, man, didn't see that coming. So now they're all in second year doing second year stuff. But then Violin sees one of her old friends who is the king's son, but he's not using his real name because he doesn't want anybody to know he's there. He's using an alias. So Violin's like, no, you can't join the school. You're not ready. Just stay. And he's like, please. And she goes, fine. And then there's a guy from the last book whose name is Liam. He died. It was real sad. I may have cried a little bit. Anyway, his sister shows up as well. Also, Violin had promised Liam on his deathbed. Well, it wasn't really a deathbed. It was more like a death leaning up against a dragon. So she had promised Liam on his death leaning up against a dragon that she would look after his sister. But, plot twist, his sister doesn't like her because she blames Violin for Liam's death. So all the first years cross the tightrope. Then they have this big ceremony where they describe all the ins and outs of the school, all the dangers. Some of the students hear this and say to themselves, no thanks, I choose life. And they run. But unfortunately, some of the dragons burn them to death, and some of the people that were in close proximity. Then Violin decides that her health is not where it should be, so she joins the Hard 75 program with this chick named Imogen. Then Sloane decides that she wants to fight Violin on the mat that they do every day where they're practicing their battling routine, and everybody's like, no. Next, Violin is hanging out with some of her friends, and then this guy walks in and says, hey, where's Violin? And this one girl pipes up and says, hey, I'm Violin, as a joke, and then he kills her. Then they're like, oh crap, somebody's trying to assassinate Violin. It's probably Daddy Atos. Then Zaddy Spearmint shows up at Violin's room from the front lines and is upset because nobody respects his authority. And then that vulnerability, I guess, helps her connect with him. Then Zaddy starts writing Violin letters in order to build trust, and he gives little details of his life, things like, I used to sit on a roof, or Cheetos give me diarrhea. And over time, Violin starts trusting him a little bit more. Violin goes to a library because her friend needed help translating some old stuff. There's also this dude in the book named Varys, who I hate with a passion I have not had since King Joffrey. Varys is picking on Violin because he doesn't like her. He's probably working for Daddy Atos. He doesn't want her here anymore, so he uses his magical powers one day and gets her real sick. But she recovers, everything's okay, and then they get kidnapped by their own teachers. I don't know why anybody would sign up for this. Why does anybody sign up for this school? Anyway, the teachers take all the students into the Forbidden Forest and say, hey, we just gave you some magical potion where you can't communicate with your dragons anymore. Plus, you can't use Google Maps. Now find your way home. Good luck. Now the students have to make it home the old school way, like finding out where north is or licking their finger and holding it up against the wind. Long story short, they make it back. Then Violin goes into the restricted section of the Dragonworts library to talk to her friend. Her friend says, hey, I've discovered that the archives are incomplete. I think the school is withholding information. Violin obviously knows this, but doesn't tell her friend this information. And I'm thinking the whole time, you're still mad at Zaddy because he won't tell you the information, yet you're doing the same freaking thing. Grony Sloane actually beats an opponent on the mat because Violin decided to go back to her poisonous ways. Violin tries to train Grony Sloane, but Grony Sloane is still upset with Violin because she thinks Violin killed her brother. Then we have some more books, some more library. Zaddy shows up to Violin's room and they fight about secrets. Again, Barash upsets, you know what? Joffrey. Joffrey upsets Terran, who's Violin's dragon, so Terran decides he's going to try to kill Joffrey's dragon. And then we get to a moment where Violin and Zaddy don't fight. Yay! And there's more classes, more schooling, more learning, more hiding, more secrets. Then Dane the Brain Peeker challenges Violin to fight. And while they're fighting, Dane tells Violin that, hey, your mother used to beat Zaddy. She's like, what? Then the king's son, Mr. Alias, tells Violin that he knows everything that's going on. He knows all the information that the school is withholding, and Violin's like, oh, we got another one on our side. And then Violin and her friends attend a torture class, which makes me ask the question yet again, why do people go to this school? Varys is doing all the... Joffrey is doing all the torturing, but Violin is still holding strong. Then Joffrey gets an idea. Let's send in Dane. So Dane comes in and Joffrey tells him, hey, you gotta peek into her brain, man. And then Dane says, I'm not gonna do it. I'm thinking, you know what? Good on you. And then Joffrey knocks her out. Long story short, they end up escaping and they pass the test. Then they go to class the next day and find a bunch of letters on all the seats that say that 10,000 people were killed. And they're like, who wrote this? Do we have a pen pal we never responded to? Then all of a sudden, Jack Harlow, who died in the last book, shows up to class and says, what's poppin'? Apparently, ever since he died, they've been mending him in the hospital wing. Then Violin is in class one day, and they get information that says that Zaddy and a bunch of other people are now injured because they were just attacked. Violin has this freak-out moment, hops on her dragon, and just leaves the school to go find him. She shows up to where he is, all freaked out, and he's fine. And then they fight. Of course. And then they're fine. And then they smash. Afterwards, Rhys tells Feyre... Afterwards, Zaddy looks at Violin and says, hey, I gotta go give this fancy kitchen set to the Griffins. You want to come? And she's like, yeah, of course. I love cutlery. And then V goes back to Dragonworts and sees Joffrey. Joffrey tries to punish her, but someone who outranks Joffrey steps in and says, hey, she's not getting punished. Then Violin decides that she wants to tell her close friends about the enemies outside of the school. She doesn't want to hold these secrets, so she unloads all of them onto her friends. And guess what? Her friends don't get mad because that's how normal people act. Violin. Then some assassins show up and try to kill them. But guess who saves Violin? Jack Harlow. Then little Mr. Alias shows up to help Violin and her friends get the books that they need from the restricted section of Dragonworts library, and they succeed. But unfortunately, Joffrey finds out what Violin has done by taking these restricted books, I guess, and starts torturing her. But guess what? She doesn't break, which is good because I really want to like you. Joffrey gets the idea again. Hey, let's try Dane. Let's peek into her brain, find out who else was in on this thing. So Dane decides this time to actually take a peek in Violin's brain. But Violin shows him the images of the Wyvern and the Venom to try to get him to understand what's actually going on and be on her side. Guess what? It works. Dane freaks out and stabs Joffrey. Finally. Which at this point, I started wondering why people who have read both books still hate Dane. I mean, he's showing a path of progression. Do you think you're perfect? You think you've done everything right your whole life? So now that Dane knows everything that's going on outside of the school, he decides to try to get some of the school to go with them to help fight the real enemies. And he actually convinces a bunch of riders to go with him. So they all fly out of Dragonworts to Zaddyland. Then all of a sudden, Goldilocks, who I guess is Purple Locks now, who has been hibernating this entire book, finally wakes up. But she woke up prematurely. So Terran tells Violin, hey, she'll never have a rider because her upper dorsomix is not fully formed or something. Now they're all in Zaddyland and they start Dragonworts 2! Then Mira, who is Violin's sister, shows up to Dragonworts 2 and sees Brendan the Biscuit Boy, who she thought was dead and who is her brother. Brendan looks at her and says, this is awkward. I know you thought I was dead. It's bring it in. So Mira walks up to him and clocks him. Also, I probably should have mentioned that the books they were trying to get from the library actually held the information they needed to raise the wards, which are shields that can shield against the venom and the wyvern out there. So Violin discovers how to raise the shields to protect themselves, but first they have to pass a Merlin trial. They do the Merlin trial and it doesn't work. And they decide that they want to be able to make their own weapons, but in order to do that, they got to go get the newest Lumineers album, so they set out to find it. Violin is given an orb to keep her from going crazy, and I'm thinking the whole time, how is this not just like Spyro the Dragon? Then Violin meets this chick named Hot Cat and gets jealous because her and Zaddy were once connected in some way. Then they go visit this guy named Takaris, who presumably has the Lumineers album they need to try to forge their own weapons. But Takaris is like, I'm not just gonna give it to you, you gotta break this box. She's like, okay. She breaks the box, I forget how, probably lightning, it doesn't really matter, but inside is a venom. And she kills it. Then Takara says, hey, thanks for breaking that box and killing that creepy thing. By the way, if you want the Lumineers album, can you also take these deadbeat Griffin riders who've been living with their mothers their whole lives and try to train them in your Dragon Wards 2 school? Cool? Okay, bye. So they agree to do so, and they finally get the Lumineers album. Then they run into some wyverns that are essentially White Walker dragons, and Violin kills one. But it's not that great because it turns out they're all connected, like smoke alarms, meaning if one goes off, they all go off. Now all the Vernon, Venom, Wyvern, White Walkers are alerted to the location where they just killed one of their friends. Which, come to think of it, why weren't they alerted when they killed the Vernon thing in the box? I don't know, there's probably a good reason for it. But I guess it's going to take them a long time to get there because it just cuts to more schooling. And then Violin finds out how to raise the wards for realsies this time. Then Violin runs into Joffrey's dragon who kills somebody, but then Tyrion kills the dragon. And then Violin and Zaddy fight. Again, because let's just stay consistent. Violin really wants to know what Zaddy Spearmint's second magical power is other than his shadow tickles. Finally, she figures it out. He can read intentions. And then the wyvern come flying in like the creepy things in the Upside Down. But Violin gets the wards up just in time. But they're not perfect. So they got to do something about it. So they have a meeting with Violin's mom. And mom tells him, hey, here's how you fix your wards. Then Violin and Dane go back to Dragonwarts to tell them all, hey, your wards are faulty as well. And then we see Jack Harlow coming in with his dragon. Then Jack Harlow is able to take the wards down with his own dragon's neck juice, which usually means, hey, you're gonna die too. But turns out Jack Harlow is a White Walker. So they capture Jack Harlow, but unfortunately the shields are down. So they decide, you know what? We're just gonna kill the White Walkers. Where's Arya Stark? Then Brennan the Biscuit Boy shows up with a bunch of riders to help him out. Come on, somebody. And then they decide, you know what? We probably can't win. Let's try to mend the wards and fix them. So they get Brennan the Biscuit Boy to try to mend the wards. But it's not working. Then we find out that Purple Locks is actually the 7th dragon type, which hopefully means something in the next book. Then Violin decides that in order to get the wards back up, she's going to have to sacrifice herself on the ward stone. So she tries to do so, but her mother steps in and sacrifices herself instead, and the wards are raised. Then they all live happily ever after. Not, because it turns out, for some reason, Zaddy Spearmint is now a White Walker. Long story short, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Somebody commented on one of my summaries recently and said, you talked so much smack about the book during the whole video and then you gave it 4 stars. You let me down, sir. That's because I'm trying to keep you guessing and trying to be humorous. I mean, how boring would it be if I just came out and was like, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Let us start at the beginning. Once upon a time, there was a... But I really liked this book. It was a good time. So for that reason, I'm going to give it 4 dragons. Stay tuned for the next video.